Welcome to Good Sex at NYU, a podcast about sex, relationships, health, and mental health in a sex-positive space. So if you're looking for sometimes serious, sometimes funny, and always sex-positive discussions, then you're in the right place. I'm Danielle Elliman, Associate Director of Sexual and Relationship Respect Services at Counseling and Wellness Services. I use she, her pronouns.
And I am April Fellers, a nurse and sexual health educator at the Student Health Center. I also use she, her pronouns. We are two white, cisgender, heterosexual, female-identifying clinicians, one with a medical background and the other with mental health experience, who seek to create a space that is inclusive of all identities, backgrounds, and perspectives.
So welcome to Good Sex at NYU. Today on the podcast, we have a repeat guest. We have Dr. Marybec Griffin here to chat more about sex and the media. So check out our personal interview with Marybec in Season 2, Episode 15 and 16. Dr. Griffin received her PhD in Social and Behavioral Health Sciences from New York University and has previously completed an MPH at NYU and holds an MA in International Affairs from the New School. Her research focuses on healthcare access among LGBTQ+ young adults, sexual health education, and the impact of media, music, and film on identity and behavior. She is the co-creator of Dr. Period Hackers, menstrual health research and education collective. She is working on a book examining femininity in slasher films. She's an adjunct professor at NYU and an assistant professor at Rutgers University. In addition to all of that, she's a trained doula and a certified sexologist. And in her free time, she enjoys baking, card making, and studying French. Anything else we left out from there?
No, I think that really is everything that's interesting about me.
I'm sure there's actually probably more stuff than that.
Probably, but at this moment, I can't think of anything.
Yeah, so I highly encourage our listeners to go back and listen to your personal episodes.
Yeah.
We also talked a little bit about this topic, but we wanted to have you back on the podcast really just to talk a little bit more about your research and some of the media work that you've done, because I think that I often talk a lot about how media as an institution has all different types of impact, including negative and sometimes positive. I don't want to give them a little bit of credit. And so I wonder if you can maybe share, just in your research or maybe your history of, working in this area, what maybe some of those positive or negative influences that you've seen.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think people discount the media and music and films and TV and all of that. I think people understand the media when they're talking about news sources and things like that and how that can play and that can have an impact. But I think they are less convinced about the impact of music and film and TV on creating norms, or reinforcing norms in the way things may or may not be presented or stigmatized. And I think one thing we don't do necessarily is go back and watch older things. Over the weekend, my friends and I were talking about Forrest Gump because it was a throwaway joke on The Traitors, which is something that me and my roommates are watching. And we're talking about how you absolutely couldn't make that film today because the way that people with learning disabilities or who have developmental issues are portrayed in that film, you just couldn't get away with it today. So I think it's something that we don't often think about. And the thing about media that we consume in our personal lives is that it can obviously reinforce biases that we already have because we're probably not going to select to watch things that don't appeal to us, right? So there's obviously confirmation bias that comes in. But I think the thing that happens, and especially with music, is that it's the soundtrack of our lives. It's everywhere. If you're in a CVS, it's there. If you're in a grocery store, it's there. So even if you don't listen to a particular genre of music, you've gotten messages from that artists are putting out there. Not everyone might listen to Taylor Swift, but I guarantee 98% of Americans know at least a line from a Taylor Swift song because it's just everywhere. So I think when we have this, it's what they call broad socialization. It's just we're getting these messages subconsciously, and then we're we're not getting that information from people that we would normally expect to get it from, like our parents or our providers or our education system or things like that. People will then seek out media to provide that information. And so whatever they're hearing or watching then helps them like form their own values and like shape how they think about things. And I, you know, broadly speaking, I think that's true. And then to bring it into like a more personal moment, that's absolutely why I do what I do. I was raised in a family where we didn't talk about sex. And if my siblings and I, especially my sister and I, asked questions, my mom was just always like, nope, good girls don't do that. Nope, good girls don't need birth control, things like that. And you're like, well, if your kid is asking, they're at least curious, if not wanting or needing this type of information or service or whatever. And so when I was a kid, one of the songs that was popular in the radio in 1989, so I was very young, too young to be having sex, or before I was even thinking about, well, I was probably thinking about sex, but I was not thinking about having sex. I was only like 8 at the time, with Salt and Pepper's Let's Talk About Sex. And I was just like, oh, well, here are 3 ladies on the radio who are talking about this. And these are things that I also have questions about. And that's where I was getting my information, because I had no other way of getting that information, because this is, you know, pre-internet, because Al Gore hadn't invented it yet.
Right.
That's a joke. Al Gore did not invent the internet, though he claims he did. For any of our listeners who don't understand that reference. So the only other option I had was going down to the basement and pulling out the S encyclopedia and like clandestinely reading, which I definitely also did, but that was giving me like a very textbook thing. Or was asking my friends who were equally as uninformed as I were and were giving me information like, well, you have to have sex with the same person 2 times in a row to get pregnant. And I was like, that doesn't seem right. And like, well, if you have sex with one person and then a different person, you can't get pregnant. I was like, again, that seems wrong, but I don't know. I have no other place to go for this. So I maybe wasn't getting all of the detailed information that I wanted, but I was at least getting the message that it's normal and I should be talking about this with my parents, with providers, with sexual partners, things like that. So I think people discount it all the time, but it's there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I was thinking of kids today. That sounds like such an old person thing to say.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering what kind of influences did they have? Because I grew up in a similar era as you. And so seeing not just that song, but other songs where women were talking a little bit more about sex and sexuality really did empower me to go against some of the things that I was being told in other institutions and in society at large, as well as like my family relationships. So I'm wondering, like, are there, I don't know, maybe you can't answer this, but are there songs or things that like are equivalent to that today?
Yeah. So yeah, sorry, there's definitely things like we've have, you know, Megan Thee Stallion and Cardi B with WAP, Wet Ass Pussy, like that song. Like, so it's definitely out there and people are talking about it. And we know that rap music, especially rap music made by female artists, tends to be more sexual in nature. And we can talk about, you know, the sexualization of Black women or women of color and maybe why that exists and like the pushing back against misogynoir and stuff like that. But they also just tend to be more explicit because I think there's a permissibility around it and this idea that they don't have to play respectability politics like white women have been forced into. So they're allowed to talk about sex in a much more real way. So there are absolutely always messages out there. Whereas in pop music that tends to be dominated by white artists in general and like white female artists, particularly white female artists who are young that are in what I call like the Disney to pop princess pipeline. That image is so tightly controlled that there isn't really any room for deviation from it. And so you have artists then like Britney Spears, who was cast as virginal, and like this kind of question, is she, isn't she, until she became too old, that's quotation marks around old, to then play that line. And then she was very quickly kind of pushed aside for like somebody newer and younger and things like that. And we see that, I think, especially like an artist that embodies that is Miley Cyrus, because at the beginning of her career, she was Hannah Montana, or she was playing the Hannah Montana character who had popular songs that were like in the top 40. on the charts. And then she was like, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm going to actually like be who I am and sort of express those emotions. And I think then the other difference that we're seeing between like rap and pop music is that in general, in broad strokes, artists working in R&B and hip hop and rap tend to be writing their own lyrics. So it comes from like a more personalized place or like a more personal story place, whereas pop music is overwhelmingly written by music production and music writing teams that are then given to the artist or shopped around to different artists to make hits. So it's much more generic. And then when we hear those messages in pop music, it's about like the idea of like metaphorical sex, like one day when I'm married or I found the right person, we're going to have sex and it's going to be amazing. Or you have artists like Britney Spears being like, whoops, I accidentally had sex, but it was totally an accident. Or like Kesha in the early part of her career, which is like, I'm just a drunk, dumb slut. Like that kind of persona that she's playing. Not that I'm slut shaming. Everyone should have the sex that they want to be having with whoever and however many people they want to be having sex with. But it's very much framed in that.
Yeah.
That like, oh, I accidentally did this, but it was a one-time thing, but I'm really a good girl kind of narrative, which is, I think, really limiting.
And does country music play a part in this, or have you done any research in that area?
So I don't listen to country music as much.
That's fair.
But again, like it's still, that one is then even more closely tied to religion, so there just isn't as much. And there are instances like with Carrie Underwood's song, I can't remember the name of it, where she's talking about, I think it's Before He Cheats is the name of the song, where she talks, but that's more about like anger and this idea of like, it doesn't really talk about whether or not she and the male character in the song story have had sex or not, but like it's implying that he's going to, and then she's going to be upset, which is a normal reaction. And then she's going to like break the headlights. But it's a really good example of a song where we see in country music one time where a woman is kind of breaking out of that mold of like, you're not allowed to be angry, which doesn't happen very often in country music or in pop music, but much more as an accepted kind of emotion in rap and R&B. Like with SZA's song, she has one, I can't remember what it's called now. I have it actually in my notes, where she talks about that. And where is it? Where she talks about wanting to kill her ex-partner's new girlfriend. Like, but she's like pretty clearly like talking to a therapist and processing through the emotions. And you have people like Alanis Morissette, another artist from the 90s, where her Jagged Little Pill album was the first time as like a younger person listening to music where I was like, oh my gosh, there's somebody out there who's angry about the same things that I am. Or No Doubt's Spiderweb's album where Gwen Stefani, like that's where the song like I'm Just a Girl is. And I'm just like, oh my God, like here's somebody talking about the patriarchy.
Yeah. This
is something that I feel every day in my life. And there are then these small instances where you see like femme anger coming through, which I think is really important because it's an emotion that women are told that we're not supposed to have or we're supposed to dismiss or we're supposed to get over really quickly. But
yeah, kind of like an Ani DeFranco.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like Blood in the Boardroom, which is a great song about menstruation and anger. So I think like unless you're kind of looking for those sort of alternative artists, but these are moments where it breaks through in like popular music that's in the top 40 that you could hear on the radio, and it's really rare when that happens.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about music, and so I want to shift maybe over into some of the other media forms that you have researched. Because I feel like we are seeing some better examples of things in the media. Still room to grow. But I know your work has been in slasher films. Can you talk to us a little bit maybe about your research, but like how are women portrayed there? How is sex portrayed? Like what are some of the things that you've observed in that area?
So slasher films are a really, really interesting thing. So like in general, I try not to consume media that's violence against women for entertainment, but slasher films I think are a really important exception to that. So obviously the broad definition of this is where a masked killer with a pointy object terrorizes a town and kills people. And the people it's usually a man who's the killer, not always, Mrs. Voorhees, but usually it's a man who then is killing women. And then there's this whole dynamic between first girls and final girls, which I'm happy to get into because it's fascinating. So it's violence perpetrated against women. But interestingly enough, the genre was created for women. It was something that studios were like, well, we have men coming in to see sort of traditional horror films, like with ghosts and possession and stuff like that. And they wanted a way to bring women into the horror genre. So they came up with slasher films.
Okay.
And it was
expecting that.
Yeah, no, and it was a way like a date night thing, because the idea for the marketing was like, well, you know, a couple will go and then again, very heteronormative, like the woman will like cozy up to her boyfriend, and this is a way to sell tickets. And some of the early films, like Slumber Party Massacre, it's an incredible film. You should absolutely watch it. It's so, like, the violence against women is so ridiculous. Like, there's a girl who gets murdered at the slumber party, and she falls out of the refrigerator. And the first time I saw it, like, this is the first slasher film that I saw, because I was not someone who watched the genre until like 2 or 3 years ago. I texted my research partner, was like, Eleanor, if we are ever cast in a slasher film, I was like, I absolutely want to be the girl who falls out of the fridge. Another one, like Black Christmas, is set in a sorority house where the sorority sisters are planning to go home, and there's a masked killer who's killing him, and they have to stop him. So it's actually like a very femme-empowering genre. And also Slumber Party Massacre, written by a woman, directed by a woman. So there's that. It's also a genre where we see a lot of gratuitous nudity and things like that. So it's not perfect, obviously.
I think that's why I thought that it was maybe more targeted towards male hetero folks.
So, right, because at first I think that was how they were like trying to capture the hook of the men. Also, it was like the 80s, so nudity was just like, gratuitous nudity was like more of a, I feel like a thing then than it is now. What else was I going to say? There was something else and I've just lost my train of thought. No. I had lost it before you asked that question. So yeah, anyway, it's a very like femme-dominated genre. And the other thing is that when there are men in there, like the boyfriends and things like that, and parents, they're often killed really quickly. Like you dispatch with the boyfriend because you see that he's not going to protect you. He's not going to help you. There are no parents or police officers or anybody else that's like coming to help you. It is a fairy tale of sorts. It shows women sort of how to survive these environments where they're hyper aware of their setting and their surroundings. And notoriously, the first person killed, it's called the first girl because she's the first girl to die. There's a lot of morality encoded in that. And like usually she's like the blonde one with curly hair who's really slutty, and like she's expressing her femininity, and she's not aware of the world that she's inhabiting. Like she's not aware that she's in a horror film because she's the first person to die. Mm-hmm. But it's also that it usually happens to somebody who's like very sexually active. So kind of this, you know, encoded learning of like, well, don't have sex and you'll be okay. Exactly. Yeah. Very slut shamey. And then the final girl is usually like a brunette with straight hair who makes it to the end, who's like hyper. Yeah. She's smart. She's studious. She doesn't have a boyfriend, or if she does have a boyfriend, they're not having sex. And she's very studious, and she's hyper aware, hyper vigilant, always like looking out for potential sources of danger. And so there's a lot to say, I think, between first girls and final girls, and this idea that the first girl's sort of fatal flaw is that she's just out there enjoying life. And the final girl, she gets to survive, but like at what cost? She has to be hyper aware. And if you look at the Halloween series with Jamie Lee Curtis, in like the most recent one, she's an adult. She's still alive. She survived all of the other Halloweens. But she's paranoid, and she's afraid of everything. And she like, it's like really impacted her life. So like, yes, she got to survive, but like at what cost? She doesn't get to have fun. But the other thing I think that's really important about slasher films is that they're black and white. Like the bad guy is the bad guy, and we're not really trying to understand why he is this way. He just is. And the other really important thing is everybody believes that he's the bad guy. And there's no like, oh, well, you know, but he was a great swimmer at Stanford and it doesn't really matter. It's this fictionalized world that we don't inhabit in like reality, because there's always this rehabilitation of a killer or somebody who's committing sexual assault, and this idea that we have to try to understand them, or like what they're doing is actually okay, or it's because of this other thing. And it's in slasher films, once they know that there's a bad guy out there, a mass killer out there, everyone just instantly believes that he's a bad guy, and that the girls that are being stalked, that are going to be killed by him, are victims. And it's like not a victim blamey genre, except for the first girl. But again, she doesn't know what film she's in.
Well, and I think like what's coming up for me as you're talking is how that kind of reinforces a lot of other things that have nothing to do with slasher films.
Yeah.
You know, that like, oh, the bad guys it's supposed to be black and white, but there is a bad guy.
Yeah.
You know, there can be no gray area.
Right. Which I know is also problematic, but it's I think the thing that I take away from it is like victims are believed, and people who are afraid, that fear is believed. And so a lot of femme-bodied people or femme-identified people watch slasher films as like a catharsis, because it's a way to work through the trauma of sort of everyday life of like, at least in this world, people who are stalked or who are targeted are believed. Yeah. And it helps process then and practice fear in a very controlled environment.
And they're empowered.
Yeah, exactly. And like, and the kill scenes, like obviously there's murder of women and things like that, but they're meant to be funny in a way. So it's even like the death and the bad stuff that comes with the fear that mimics the real world is done in a lighthearted way. So it's like, it's a really interesting and complicated genre. And like, because again, my writing partner, Eleanor Reynolds, she is like super into slasher films. She watches them all the time. And she approached me because I had the quantitative skills to like look at this book. And then slowly over time, we've talked about it. And she's like, at the beginning of this, she was very much like, no, Marybec, like first girls are just like, they're silly. And I was like, no, but actually they're just paying the price for like, even if it's just a moment in time, like having fun and like just not worrying. And like, is that the price? Like, should that be the price of just a moment of joy and freedom where you're not thinking about like,
isn't that what society says?
Exactly.
About any woman who is enjoying her life and
she had it coming. Yeah. What was she wearing? Yeah. Oh, she was walking home late at night. It's just like,
so it makes the rest of us, all the other, people, anxious.
Exactly. And then we become hyper vigilant final girls. And it's like, yes, you need to be aware of your surroundings and things like that, but
it's not the cause.
Exactly. So. But who wants to live in a world where they're like they have to be constantly hyper aware?
You never get to be a first girl.
Exactly. So my whole thing is we should try, all of us, to have at least a little part of both.
Yeah.
Because I think that's really important, because I speak as a cis woman.
Yeah.
Or as somebody who just identifies as femme, like we should be allowed to have fun too, Yeah. Because it's exhausting always looking out for our safety.
Absolutely. Do you think that there is a need to emphasize passing the Bechdel test in slasher horror films? And just for everyone else, like the Bechdel test is a way of evaluating whether or not a film or other work of fiction portrays women in a way that is sexist or characterized by gender stereotyping. So to pass that test, a work must feature at least two women. These women must talk to each other, and their conversation must concern something other than a man.
And it's amazing how many bits of media don't actually pass the Bechdel test. Like there's only one woman, or if there's two, they're talking about relationship problems and only that. So I do think it's important, and I do think that it's important in horror. And again, I think that with a lot of the horror genre, they do pass the Bechdel test, and slasher films by definition have to pass the Bechdel test, because there has to be more than one female character, because they've got to kill a bunch of them.
Yeah. Makes sense. But not talking about men or relationships might be hard in some of those.
Yeah. So, I mean, like they might be talking about like the killer or things like that, but they'll also talk about like sometimes like female friendships or things like that. Yeah. So, and again, like it's also hard because the man, I mean, it's not a relationship because it's like a masked killer. So yes, they're talking about a man, but it's not about like a relationship. Yeah. So maybe it only passes like on a technicality. But if you're talking about like rom-coms and things like that, most of them don't pass the Bechdel test. So
that's what I was thinking. I was just thinking how much of that is also reinforced in our day-to-day life, that like we have to be talking about our relationships. People will constantly ask me as a single person my status.
Yeah.
You know, I go to family reunions or I go visit my family. It's like, oh, who are you dating? I'm like, oh yeah, because that's all I am.
Yeah. Or if you are partnered, they're like, oh, well, how is your partner? And you're like, but I also have a lot of interesting things going on too. So yeah, no, I think it's one of those things that kind of cuts both ways. I think another interesting thing is, even if a film passes the Bechdel test, looking at how the film is shot is really important. If it's shot through like the male gaze or the female gaze. Mm-hmm. So when you're thinking about the male gaze, if you think about the film Transformers, it's the first one with like Megan Fox. That is so male gaze. Like the camera angles are really, they're low angle shots. So they emphasize like the curves of bodies and breasts that are like really close. And then like sticking close to like breasts, hips, things like that. The lighting is then usually like soft and ethereal, so that, you know.
Is that the same for the male characters as well as the female, or is it just?
No, so primarily the female characters are shot this way.
And maybe I'm down for it if they're also highlighting the curves of the
right. And they're like usually wearing like then revealing clothing and things like that. And then the narrative arc of the females in a male gaze film don't pass the Bechdel test because they only exist then to like aid the male along his journey, like the protagonist along on the journey. So like their accessories, their girlfriends or things like that. Like even in something like that movie 500 Days of Summer, like she's just a plot point. She's not really anything beyond that. And then films that are shot like in the female gaze, they're more neutral angle shots where the characters are framed so like you can see space above their head. It's just their torsos. They focus more on clothing, being costumes that like emphasize the character choices or how comfortable she is like in her world. Like the clothing is comfortable to be wearing unless there's like some kind of period time period where like nobody was like comfortable
Victorian
wearing
era.
Yeah, like nobody is comfortable in a corset. And like there's lighting then that's uses shadows to convey emotion and things like that. And the women then in movies shot in the female gaze have full relationships. They have friends, they're sisters. The characters have their own desires and goals. Like they're more than just a plot accessory. So things like Portrait of a Woman on Fire is an example of like a film in the female gaze. Yeah,
that's interesting to think about. I think there are some films that are really obvious, like male gaze, and others that aren't. I'm sort of thinking about like TV shows as well. Like, have you thinking about this, not that you've done research specifically in that area, but like, do you see like a shift that there are more female perspective?
I think when we see more films and TV that are written by women or directed by women. So the show Fleabag, I think, is incredible. It's written and directed, and it stars Phoebe Waller-Bridge. She's incredible. If you've not seen Fleabag.
I haven't seen it.
Oh my gosh.
Well, mostly because I don't have whatever platform it's on.
I think it's on.
I think it's Amazon.
I know. You could probably find an illegal stream. Not that I think you should pay for media. I think it's. But
I don't want to pay him.
True. No, don't. I was gonna say it's on Apple TV, but like, are any billionaires really? Yeah.
No, I don't think that's even much better.
No, exactly.
I mean, they still have a DEI program.
So maybe. So in this moment in time.
Anyway.
But then it comes like, how do you ethically consume media when all of the major corporations? Exactly.
They can't even go to Target.
But it's like it's a show about a woman who is sexually. Like she's just got like a lot of sexuality. She has a lot of sex. She's dealing with grief and other emotions, and it's so unbelievably brilliant. And there's like a YouTube video that you can watch that deconstructs the second season and exactly how masterfully it was shot and how like the point of view of the camera changes. It's incredible. Like I know we're trying not to give these bad corporations money, but you're denying yourself. Like the show is that great.
I mean, everyone I've ever, because of the work that I do, everyone has always asked me, have I seen that? I was like, no, because this isn't new for me to be protesting Amazon. I have for the last like 10 years. So like, it's not new for me. But.
I think I watched, no, because you can't, if you get like a VPN, you can just watch it from the BBC. I think they're maybe less objectionable. I don't know. And there's also like a really great monologue about like menopause and femme pain. It's just, it's really, really incredible. And there was something else. There was another one I was going to say, but really Fleabag is just.
Yeah.
I just saw Baby Girl, which again is directed by a woman, stars Nicole
I heard
Kidman.
that Nicole Kidman has the last 17 films have all been female directed.
Yeah. Yeah, I was reading because she said she made a commitment to work with at least one female director every 18 months, and she's actually gone over and above that. Yeah. I mean, I think Baby Girl has some like problematic things because it talks about like childhood sexual exploitation, and that's the reason why she's into the type of sex that she's having. But it's like also no people could just be into the type of sex that she has in the film because that's what they're into. Yeah. So it's got some problematic narratives, but the way the sex was shot is very like it's necessary, and it doesn't feel exploitative of Nicole Kidman, and it's very much shot like framing people all together. Like yeah.
I have to say, I haven't seen the film.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to like it more than I did.
But, I mean, I hear that, like, it's good to have various different narratives out there and kinks and various different things coming to the fore. I think my criticism, knowing that I have not seen the film, is I always, like, hesitate. And I know that part of the kink is that, like, there is a power dynamic. But, like, why must it always be, like, an inappropriate relationship or inappropriate situation? Like, there's definitely power dynamics that you can create in a kink situation. That have nothing to do with someone being an employee.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, in your agency. Like, you can go and you can get someone who is younger off a website. Or,
exactly.
You know, various different ways that could have been portrayed. But again, I've had, like, people in the film where like, oh, but it adds to, and, like, just, like, so many times in the past, like, plays and movies have always, like, added, sometimes gratuitously, history of sexual assault. History of incest. History of all these, like, traumas that have a cause for some kind of behavior. And I was like, that shouldn't always be our like baseline, like, oh, this trauma is the reason why someone's doing this terrible thing or why they're doing. And it just like bothers me, like both that and this, like, you can do good kink and not have some of those things. Like, you don't have to have inappropriate relationships. Like, I will see a lot of therapists / social workers, mostly just psychologists or therapists on TV as well, where it is, you know, they're having an inappropriate relationship with their client. I'm like, come on, how many of us are actually doing that?
Exactly. I didn't know about the fact that he was an employee, because I knew very little about the film beforehand, except for that Nicole Kidman is her character is in a relationship with a younger person. And I was like, okay, well, this is not a dynamic that we usually see where it's an older woman and a younger male partner. So it's like, okay, like good. And that an older woman is able to be sexual on camera, and it's like not questioned, like that she is a desirable, sexy individual. And then when we got more into it, I was like, ugh. And then seeing the like inappropriate power dynamic because it's supervisor and intern. I then wondered, I was like, we see this narrative in reverse where it's like a man who's abusing his power with like a female subordinate or like, you know, employee. And people are like, oh, you know, that just kind of happens. And I wonder how many more people were like, well, it's inappropriate because it's in reverse. I'm like, and this idea that like women shouldn't be doing that because they should be nurturing and caring. And like, how does that then just reinforce gender stereotypes and gender norms and things like that? Because sometimes sometimes women do things that aren't moral or ethical. And so like, I agree. Like it's complicated because like I'm glad that we're seeing that, but also does it have? But then looking at the kink framing, like does it have to be something that's inappropriate? Like couldn't we just have a really hot kink film?
Yeah, I think that's where I'm coming from. I do think that, you know, maybe it's my own bias. I think that I'm specifically placing that onto this particular role, this particular film. But I think I have a problem with it with any like, you know, intern at, like, no matter the gender. You know, it's like that. Why do we have to always frame it in that way? Like, I go through trainings, like, I help lead some of these things at my organization around, like, inappropriate relationships. And I'm like, no, that's not okay.
No, I agree.
Like, yes, we need add tension in a film. But, like, again, this is why sometimes people think it's okay in reality. Oh, but I see it all the time on TV. You know, like, it's not a big deal. It normalizes it. And then you're like, oh, well, like, if I go and I, like, hit on someone, you know, in my office, then that's okay. If I go hit on an intern,
it's totally fine. And it's not, because, again, the message then becomes normalized.
Exactly. So, I mean, I'm not necessarily putting the film down. I just think that,
I mean,
first of all, I should probably watch it before I do any more criticizing of it. But I think that has been my thing that's held me back.
Yeah. No, I mean, as somebody who's seen it, like all of those criticisms are valuable. And I was like, well, I should see it because other people are talking about it and people are going to ask me if I have an opinion about it. Yeah. And also it was cold one weekend and I was bored and I go see movies a lot. So it's like, whatever, I'm just going to see it. But yeah, like I remember leaving the theater and being like, golf claps, because I think it's important. Like it's important that we're seeing some of the things. I think it's damaging or harmful to see some of it. Although I will say, I cannot remember the male actor's name, and he's been in a few things that I've really enjoyed, but I can't remember his name.
That feels kind of
Harrison something maybe.
Yeah, it was kind of kismic though. That like
kind
we used
of,
to not remember some.
I'm also just old and I like whatever pop culture is like passing me by. I can't keep up with it.
I feel like after a certain point in the 2000s, I just stopped remembering people's names.
So
I knew who's come after that. I'm like, I don't know, that face looks familiar.
I just decided, I was like, you know what, this is not important for me to keep up with anymore. He has a monologue in there where he does correct some of the kink narrative in the film. He's like, no, that's an old version of sexuality. No. So like that was like a nice moment.
Yeah.
And I wish there had maybe been a little more of that. But speaking of powerful men who do bad things in film, have you seen Blink Twice?
I have not. Tell me more.
A film that is directed by Zoe Kravitz. I don't believe she wrote it, but first off, it's a movie about power imbalances and hierarchical power structures and sexual relationships. And there is violence against women. But first off, it's a movie that had a disclaimer before you even watched it, like a trigger warning, which I've never seen in a film before. So I think that was really interesting. But it's about, I'm going to try to summarize it without giving away anything. This woman who is like a cater waiter kind of part-time thing, and she does nails on the side. And she meets this like billionaire. She's catering an event, or she's part of the catering team. She isn't catering it, but she's like she's one of the wait staff at the event, his event, and it's like some like award ceremony or something. That basically is just like, oh, isn't this guy so great? And like from the beginning that he's had like problematic behavior that he's apologized for, and they meet. And then he's like, hey, would you like to come with me to my like private island? And so she and her friend go, and things sort of like mysteries are uncovered and things like that. And it's very much, if you're a fan of the good for her film genre, which I'm definitely a fan of, things like Gone Girl or Promising Young Woman and things like that.
Tell me more. What'd you say? Good.
Gone Girl?
No, you said like the genre.
Good for her cinema.
Okay.
Companion, it's currently out there in the theaters. If people haven't seen that one, it's also excellent. But anyway, Blink Twice is really like it's done from a feminist perspective, and it's this idea where like women are in the world where men are doing bad things, and then they turn the narrative and like flip the script, and sometimes they do bad things, or like they have to do things that are like unethical or bad. But you root for them and you like sort of don't care because you're like, yeah, good for her. Like she's getting what she needs to. So like Gone Girl is one of my favorite films. And obviously the character of Amazing Amy is problematic, but I also identify with her like a lot. And I'm not saying that she definitely went too far, but like I understand this idea of like I have to get out, and the only way that I can get out is to do this. And like also this idea of like I want to punish somebody who's hurt me, or like I want to kind of push that boundary. So it does that. So again, it's one of these things where like, quote, women are behaving badly, but you sort of don't care.
Yeah.
Or like they get their comeuppance, but they're definitely like anti-heroes. They're not without getting their hands dirty or doing things that are unsavory.
Yeah. And I find it interesting that like we have some of these movie genres where women are bucking that like narrative where we're supposed to be the good girl. Like we're not ever supposed to be angry or violent. And that never really translates into action. Like we still see that men are predominantly the more violent.
Yeah. Well, because anytime that a woman kills or does something horrible, the outcry is so disproportionate. Like women who killed their children, they're like, oh my gosh, how could you? That's against her nature. It's like, but men kill their children all the time. And we're just like, oh yeah, that's what happens.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm not saying that killing children is right.
Never,
like definitely
never,
not ever. But what I'm saying is like, why is
response.
why is the response not like, oh my gosh, a parent harmed their child? Why is it like, oh my gosh, a woman did, can you believe?
Yeah.
It's like, well, that's like,
we put so much more emphasis on motherhood.
Yeah. Or like when women are serial killers, not that that happens very often, we're like, oh, the public outcry is like, oh my gosh, can you believe?
Yeah.
And it's like, it's not natural for women to kill. Like, why not? We're also animals that can also feel rage and or have like other reasons why we might be doing that. So it's, Anyway, I really like the good for her genre because, again, it's catharsis. It's never something that I would do myself because I don't believe in harming other humans. But it's fun to watch it on TV and see a world where it happens and they can get away with it. And it's revenge based. I'm a Scorpio, so I live for revenge. But yeah, anyway, it's messy, but I like it.
I don't know what that means about me. I don't watch any of those things.
Interesting. Well, yeah, we're like the complete opposite zodiac signs. So we balance each other. So we'll come to the same sort of conclusion, but in a different way. So, I think we're seeing more stories written by femme people, written by trans people, written by non-binary people who feature actors that are telling those stories that are also members of those groups. So I think that's really good. And that I also love the idea that we're seeing a lot of queer cinema that isn't just about, like, if we're talking about like gay men in cinema, that it's not just these narratives around like HIV and things like that, but it's
just like, about their queerness, about their relationship.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think about, oh gosh, it's a movie with Andrew Scott and Paul Mescal. Oh.
You just said wah, 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 wah. I have no idea.
Oh my gosh. I can't believe I'm not going to be able to remember this. All of Us Strangers. Woo, woo. Okay. If I have enough time, it'll come to me. All of Us Strangers. And it's about these two men who are queer, and they're talking about queer identities and families and relationships. It's also about time and grief. So like I'm totally into all of those themes about time and grief. But it's like their queerness is both essential to the film because they're talking about just their lives, but it's also sort of incidental because it's just a story about humans. Mm-hmm. And it's not like this horrible thing that's happened. Like it's not, oh, and then AIDS came and HIV and So I really like narratives like that. Or there's this other one called The Weekend that I think is one of the most beautiful films about short relationships. And by short, I mean like you meet somebody on a hookup app and you have an experience of like maybe seeing them once or twice, or maybe in the movie, the characters spend the weekend together. And they just like, they learn a lot about themselves. And like, there's a quote from the movie that I'm going to mess up, but it's something like, when you meet somebody new, you can see the difference in who you're presenting to them and who you really are. And in that space of difference in those two identities, you can see where you want to grow. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, like that is so absolutely true. And like, this idea then of like, friends that you've had from childhood that like don't want you to be anything different. So it's talking about like growth and maturity and evolution of self and identity. It's just it's really beautifully done. And again, it's a story where like queerness is essential to who they are, but it's not defined by like these traditional kind of stories and tropes that we've seen.
Yeah. How do you think the media that we consume really kind of shapes our identities from that early age?
So, I think it shapes it a lot because it tells us what's normal, quote unquote, and what's deviant, quote unquote, like how we should behave, who should be behaving, how. And I'm not saying like there's definitely things that help shape my identity that are violent that like young people shouldn't be watching. But again, like if you're listening to music where a female artist or a trans artist is talking about their body or affirming their gender or engaging in sex that makes them feel good and affirms their sexuality and their sense of self, that I think then opens up the possibility of asking questions and then forming your own identity around it. But if you're listening to music or consuming other media where it's something that's shut down or closed off, or like they're just not talking about it, it insidiously acts on you and tells you like you shouldn't be thinking about this. Mm-hmm. This is not something that you should be doing or things like that. And I think there is this like rich literary history. Like I'm somebody who read books like Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, about like bodies and period and menstruation. I remember when I was reading, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't let my mom see this. Like, what will she think? But it was one of those things where I was just like, well, if these characters in this book that I'm reading when I'm like 8 are thinking and talking about this, like, then it's okay for me to be doing that. Like they're not doing anything wrong. They're not getting in trouble for asking these questions or just like being people who are thinking about this. So I think it allows like permissibility for people to explore who they are and doesn't keep us so narrowly defined in these very rigid, very strict gender roles.
Yeah, I think the other thing that was coming up for me around that question is that even from like an early age, when you think of like Barney or Sesame Street, or I think there's like a YouTube star like Rachel, talking about reinforcing our values and our morals. Like even that is something that, you know, has a positive and can sometimes have a negative depending on what you're watching or consuming or what your child is, you know? So I think starts very early.
Yeah. Well, and so I'm going to rail, this is going to be a very unpopular opinion. I know this, but like, I'm going to rail against Harry Potter, and not because of the anti-transness of the author whose name I'm totally blanking on, because again, I can't be bothered to remember these things anymore. Also, she's unimportant to me. Yeah. But like, I think Harry Potter's a really boring story because you have the Harry Potter character. He just like, he always does everything that he's supposed to. And he's always like this good kid and he doesn't push the boundaries and isn't like curious. And it's like, he has to exist as this like perfect sort of student who's then got this evil thing like thrust upon him that he has to kind of battle over. And I'm just like, that's not interesting to me because people aren't perfect. And I think the more important thing when we're talking about values and morals and shaping those things is that people are allowed to be imperfect as long as you're learning something from it. And not everybody is perfect all the time. Like, I've definitely done things when I was a kid that I'm ashamed of now. I shoplifted a Snorks keychain one time when I was like 6, and I still remember this. Like, and I still have the keychain. And it's like, I remember afterwards, after I done it, my parents didn't know. Like, I felt really bad about that. And I was just like, okay, like, you did a bad thing one time, but you're not a bad person. And like, I was able to like learn and grow from that because I was consuming media where people were allowed to make mistakes. I mean, I can't think of any specific examples of it now, but this idea that like I didn't have to be rigidly perfect.
Yeah.
I think.
And so I hear you saying that maybe that for, depending on like age and development, Harry Potter might reinforce a narrative that we should strive to be perfect.
Yeah.
Whereas like maybe someone who's a little bit older might look at that and say, well, maybe, you know, that's society saying that we have to be perfect.
Maybe,
but that's, you know, Harry's internal dialogue around evil forces coming at him and sort of forcing him. Again, I've watched one Harry Potter film.
Oh, yeah. I think they're really boring. So, I saw them in the theaters and I fell asleep every time.
But I was just thinking, like, as you're describing it, it's like, oh, well, maybe that's like a representation of society. We're supposed to be perfect. And there's all these evils that are coming at us.
Yeah, and like the bad people are bad.
Exactly. So maybe it's more of a broader, you know, look at.
To tie that back to slasher films, I was just like praising a world where like victims are believed. And now I'm just like, again, here's a world that's very black and white. This person is always good and this person is always bad. But in the slasher genre, the final girl has to, on occasion, like kill the masked killer or do things that are dirty or, you know, not feminine to survive. So, yeah.
So that tells me we should embrace all sides of ourselves, our femininity, our masculinity, our
binariness.
Exactly.
Like,
yeah.
Because gender is a construct, so pick from gendered norms that are masculine in quotation or feminine in quotation and just create your own identity. Let's liberate ourselves from all of this nonsense and just allow ourselves to be fully recognized humans. What a novel concept.
Yeah. So how do you think media surrounding sex informs young people and what they do in the bedroom or what they do in sex?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think there's a lot happening. And so one of the research papers that I wrote with also another NYU alum, Adele Fournay, looks at condom messages in rap music, specifically only rap music, because again, it's a genre that's more written by the artist and not by music writing teams. And it tends to be more personal. So it serves sort of like in-depth interviews or something like that. And again, rap is just a more explicit genre because it's allowed to be. And what we're finding is then that there was a bunch of messages about sex And then we then looked at like, well, what about condom use? Are those things mentioned? And only something like 3% of the songs mentioned condoms at all. And just because it mentioned a condom, it doesn't mean that it mentioned using one. It could have also mentioned specifically not using one, like trying to impregnate somebody, or like the name of the paper is, part of my language, fuck bitches raw on the kitchen floor. So if you're fucking bitches raw on the kitchen floor, you're not using a condom. So like that was an example of like a condom message.
Yeah.
But a message where you're not using one. And one of the most interesting, so we looked at the lyrics for rap songs on every top 10 album from the years 1991 to 2017, because the paper came out a couple years later. And just like looked for messages, looked at when the messages were occurring, like if there was a year where there were just more condom messages than others. And then we looked at the YRBSS data, so the Youth Risk Behavior Surveillance Survey, that's collected by the CDC, or probably was collected by the CDC in odd years, so between 1991 and 2017. And they ask a specific question about the last time you had sex, did you use a condom? And so again, just a binary answer, like yes or no. And then they also collected data on a person's sex. So again, along a binary, male and female, and then people's racial and ethnic backgrounds. So what we did is we mapped this, and we saw a really dramatic increase of like, I think like 20% of young people in high school saying they used a condom the last time they had sex between like 2005 and 2009. And we're like, well, that's like really weird. Like, why is it all of a sudden shooting up? And then it falls off again fairly dramatically, and then it sort of steadily climbs back up. We're like what was happening then? And then we looked at it by gender, and we saw, again, both men and women were saying that they reported an increase in condom use between, again, those years 2007 and 2009. But when we looked at it by sex and then by racial and ethnic background, the increase was being driven overwhelmingly by white people. So one of the things we know about the first time people have sex, or when they're having sex when they're younger, is they tend to have sexual partners that match their racial and ethnic background because of, like larger forces of racism and, neighborhoods and, where people live, and poverty lines and redlining and things like that. And also people tend to be around people who are more similar to them in a number of ways. Mm-hmm. So your first sexual partner is more likely to be of your same racial and ethnic background, your same socioeconomic status, things like that. So we think then the women are the increase in the number of women who are using condoms the last time they had sex is the number of men who are using condoms the last time they had sex. Also, women being the receptive partner in a heterosexual dynamic, they don't really have control over whether or not a person's using a condom. They can request it, and they can make the decision whether or not to have sex if the person says, no, I'm not going to use a condom. So we're like, okay, why might men between the years of like 2007 and 2009, why might we see this dramatic increase? I went back to the music, and Eminem, super popular rapper, really, really prolific, especially in these years. He's coming out with like an album every year, and he talks about condoms all the time and sex all the time. Not always good messages, because fucking bitches raw on the kitchen floor is his lyric. Mm-hmm. But he's also then talking a lot about using condoms because women are just trying to get pregnant and steal your money, as a kind of a legacy of his relationship with his ex-wife, Kim, and things like that. So there's this really problematic messaging around sex and condoms and women, but also it potentially had the impact of causing white men to be more aware of using condoms when they were having sex, although for misogynistic reasons. Mm-hmm. So it's like a good thing happened because of a bad message. Yeah. And again, like this is correlation, it's not causation. We can't prove this. But again, if we're going back to that idea of broad socialization theory that I mentioned at the beginning of the interview, people, if they're looking for this message and they're not getting it from sex ed, you're going to look to the media. And then there's also other communication theories that say when the messenger shares your identities, you're more likely to take in that message and encode it. So for white men, having a white male rapper telling them that they should be using condoms is something that they're going to receive and take in and make part of their norms and their behavior more than, say, a black rapper who's also male in that same time period. Mm-hmm. So yeah, so it's like one of those things that, like, again, we can't say that it's true or not.
Yeah.
But Eminem seems to, even to like the present day, have a really big impact on culture and on youth culture. So I think there is also like this elasticity to it. This idea that, like, even if he was recording music before people became sexually active, you have to get those messages and form those beliefs if you're thinking about like a stages of change model, where people are getting those messages, and then when they decide to become sexually active, they're like, what information do I have? Let me scroll back through the mental Rolodex. Okay, here's a thing, here's a thing, here's a thing, to construct their values.
Is there anything else that you want to share with our listeners about sex in movies, media in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think we should be like wary consumers of the media, because like I definitely consume problematic media or songs that are problematic that I really like. And it's this idea that, again, you can like and enjoy it. And I think it's also then really important to like sit critically with this media if it's something that you don't agree with, like if the messages that are put out there like are things that you don't agree with. And just kind of think like what you can take away from that. I think it's also really important to remember, like, especially if it's music, it's a story about a point in time, or a film, like it's a story about a point in time. But especially with music, it's really hard to get a beginning, middle, end. You're kind of getting a beginning and a middle in that story, and you're not necessarily seeing like the resolution. And with films, you get more of that because it's a longer format media. And the other thing too with music is because it's only an auditory medium, it's harder for our brains and our ears to hear that. Also, if the musicians aren't enunciating super clearly, like I definitely have lyrics that I've heard wrong for decades that I refuse to believe, or they're like other things. But when we're just listening to it, it's like we get the messages more passively, but they get stuck in there, and we're not thinking about it critically. Whereas if we see a story, like a film, and it's auditory and visual, those things get stored in our long-term memory, and we're also then not allowed to create a narrative around it because we're seeing visually exactly how the artist wants us to see it. And our brains can just take in like something like 60 times the amount of information when it's an auditory and a visual message, and it gets stuck in the long term, whereas auditory only messages, our brains just don't remember as well, and we then get to construct images around it. So I think it's one of those things when we're thinking about media, it's like interesting too. Like I wish more than anything, not really more than anything, but I think it'd be really cool to be like a neuroscientist, but my brain does not work that way. But brains are really, really cool, and understanding just that impact. So if you're going to be listening to media, like you're listening to songs and things like that, and you want to be a more critical consumer, I think it's really important to like listen to the music, like go to like YouTube clips. They have like lyric videos so that you're seeing the lyrics too. Because in the process of writing the paper with Adele, we were like, oh yeah, it'll be easy. Like we've heard these songs before, but reading the lyrics was hard. It was like it hits you in a different way when you're seeing it in print, and you can't sort of mince words. Like the exact amount of violence is there, and you're like, oh my God, like this is awful. And there'd be times like I would be like, Adele, I've only read 3 albums this week. I have to take a break because the ones I read were just so incredibly violent or misogynistic that I was like, I need a break. Right. So like read the liner notes as you're listening, or watch the lyric videos on YouTube and things like that.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice for any kind of media. Yeah. I'm thinking of porn as well. Like we should really, again, maybe not in the moment when you need it, but like critically analyze afterwards. Hey, that wasn't real. That's not what I can anticipate.
And there are places, there are places where you can get ethical porn that you can pay for, that are the actors consent, and they're part of the process of making the porn and things like that.
But I mean, even just like having a critical eye. I mean, again, I would hope that everyone could get like ethical porn, but if not, really sort of, let me just like make sure I'm, critically analyzing that, not just like, okay, on to the next.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, that's not real life. That's not what every, person might want. Like in the, a situation where I'm having sex, that may not work. I need to like have, have a critical eye with anything.
Yeah. Well, I think like things, again, I love TikTok, but things like TikTok, things like Instagram, and even like dating apps, the exchanges are so ephemeral that people seem really disposable. And I feel like we often forget that those are real people in the media, like in the media that we're consuming or that we're swiping on or passing up or we're ghosting and things like that. But they're real people with real feelings.
We need to remember that humanization.
Yeah, exactly. Because otherwise everybody just like everything feels very kind of disposable. And I think especially in this moment in time, finding connection and community is really, really important.
So important.
I mean, always it is, but like especially now.
Especially now. But oh, this was so interesting.
Yeah.
So where can our listeners find you if they want more information or they want to like tune into your work? Yeah.
So I am on all social media platforms. Well, not RedCap because that's too new for me.
What that is.
Yeah. It's like, I think the alternative to TikTok, if TikTok was going to be banned. And I don't TikTok like I should because one day I'm going to learn how it actually works to make a video because it seems very overwhelming. But I'm at Marybec Griffin for my own stuff. I'm at Dr. Period Hackers if you're interested in menstrual health information. And we're at Bloody Women if you're interested in the slasher film stuff.
Okay.
So yeah, trying to make myself a media mogul, which is hard when you don't know how TikTok works. And you're like, the idea of putting together a video that I have to edit seems like more work than I can possibly do.
Yeah.
But that's a 2025 goal. So maybe I'll make it. It was a 2024 goal, that I didn't make. So maybe this year is the year. Yeah. Just keep kicking it down the road.
Yeah. Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
If you have questions about the podcast or anything we talked about today, please feel free to reach out to us at goodsex.podcast@nyu.edu. This email address is monitored during business hours and may take 3 to 4 days for follow-up. We are definitely open to critical and thoughtful feedback, as we didn't cover everything in this episode and might have said something that was inaccurate or that had a negative impact on someone. If you have questions about your sexual health and are an NYU student, you can connect with our Student Health Center sex expert at sexpert@nyu.edu or schedule an appointment through the Student Health Center portal. Look at our show notes for additional information and resources, including organizations, articles, books, and videos.
If you have urgent mental health concerns, safety issues, or you are worried that someone might have caused harm to you, or that you might have caused harm to someone, then you can contact NYU's Confidential Wellness Exchange at 212-443-9999. Chat with them using their mobile app or email them at wellness.exchange@nyu.edu. For anyone, NYU or non-NYU listeners, you can call the National Sexual Assault Hotline at 1-800-656-4673, the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233, or the National Mental Health Hotline. Simply dial 988 from anywhere in the U.S.
Thanks for listening, and tune in to our next episode where we continue to talk about good sex at NYU. Subscribe to the podcast to hear all of our quickies and interviews with NYU community members. Thanks to our content contributors for this episode, Bernadette Kerr, Alyssa LaFosse, Dr. Dominic Vaini-Amisa, Zoe Raguzios, and to our health promotion team, Anna Genova, Jenny Mellum, Parade Stone, and Arna Dixit, and to Gotham Studios and Karen Ortman.